The air in the transport plane's belly tasted of stale sweat and ozone. Warrant Officer Anya Sharma kept her eyes down, focused on the worn webbing of the seat in front of her as the C-130 began its corkscrew descent into FOB Sentinel. The mountains of this godforsaken province clawed at the sky outside, jagged teeth of granite and shale that had chewed up empires for centuries. The soldiers around her, a fresh rotation of infantry grunts from the 10th Mountain Division, were loud and nervous, their bravado a thin shell against the rattling fuselage and the G-forces pulling at their stomachs. They saw her, of course. A woman, older than most of them, her face a quiet mask. They saw the single, unassuming bar of a warrant officer, too, on her collar, and the logistics branch insignia. A bean counter, a remph, someone from the rear coming to complicate their lives with paperwork. The landing was a controlled crash, a testament to the skill of pilots who treated dirt runways like aircraft carriers. The ramp dropped with a hydraulic hiss, flooding the dark interior with blinding, dust-choked light. Sharma slung her go-bag over her shoulder and walked down the ramp without a word, her boots crunching on the gravel. The heat was a physical blow, a solid wall of air that smelled of diesel fumes, sun-baked earth, and the faint unsettling sweetness of the burn pits. FOB Sentinel was an ugly, sprawling creature of HESCO barriers, concertina wire, and sand-colored shipping containers. It was a temporary place that had become painfully permanent. As she made her way towards the command post, she felt the stares. They weren't hostile, not yet, just curious, dismissive. Sergeant Reyes, a thick-necked squad leader with a swagger that bordered on parody, nudged one of his men. "Get a load of that. Command sent us a new supply clerk. Bet she gets the good coffee flown in." A few of them snickered. Sharma's expression didn't change. She had heard it all before, in a dozen other languages, in 100 other dust bowls just like this one. The mockery was a constant, like the grit that worked its way into everything. Her temporary quarters were a Conex box, a windowless steel coffin that had been baking in the sun all day. The air inside was thick enough to swim through. She dropped her bag on the metal frame cot, the only piece of furniture besides a small, scarred locker. She didn't unpack. She stood for a moment in the suffocating silence, her eyes closed, letting the rhythm of the bass settle into her bones. The distant thud of artillery practice, the constant hum of generators, the shouts of men who thought volume equated to strength. She cataloged the sounds, the smells, the subtle vibrations in the floor. This place was tense. The air was thin, but the atmosphere was heavy, charged with a low-grade, persistent fear. Her job here, officially, was to conduct a full audit of the FOB's supply chain, to find and fix the inefficiencies that were causing shortages of critical equipment. Her real job was to find out why a place this well-supplied was bleeding resources like a severed artery. An hour later, showered and in a fresh uniform, she walked into the Tactical Operations Center. The TIOC was the FOB's nerve center, a dimly lit, air-conditioned haven of flickering screens, radio chatter, and the low murmur of controlled chaos. Maps covered the walls, spiderwebbed with operational routes and intelligence markers. Colonel Marcus Thorne stood at the center of it all, a human island of authority. He was tall, lean, with the predatory stillness of a career infantryman. His eyes, the color of faded slate, swept over her, cataloging her rank, her branch, and her gender in a single dismissive glance. "Warrant Officer Sharma," he said, his voice a low growl that cut through the talk's hum. He didn't offer a handshake. "You're the logistician from Division." It wasn't a question. "Yes, Colonel." Her voice was calm, level. "Right. He turned back to the main strategy map, already losing interest. My Sergeant Major will get you squared away. You're here to count my beans and file my reports. I want you to understand something. Out here, we have two kinds of people, triggers and targets. Your job is to make sure the triggers have what they need. Stay out of the wire, stay off my comms, and stay out of my operator's way. We clear? Crystal, Colonel. The Colonel's eyes narrowed slightly, catching on a small, unfamiliar object on her uniform, pinned just above her ribbon rack. It was a tarnished silver pin, no bigger than a thumbnail, shaped like a stylized eagle in a steep dive, its talons holding something unseen. It wasn't a standard qualification badge. It was too simple, too elegant. It looked out of place among the crisp regulation insignia. He gestured at it with his chin, a smirk touching the corner of his mouth. "What's that little trinket, warrant officer? Pick that up at a PX souvenir shop?" The question was deliberately loud, meant for the audience of officers and NCOs around them. Sergeant Reyes, who had been lingering near the comm station, grinned openly. The message was clear. She was not one of them. She was an outsider, decorated with meaningless baubles. Sharma's gaze remained steady. "It was issued to me, sir." Her lack of a defensive or flustered reaction seemed to annoy him more than defiance would have. He wanted her to be intimidated. Her placid composure was an insult. "Issued for what? Best pencil pusher of the year?" He scoffed. "This is a combat zone. We wear our accomplishments here, things that were earned in blood and dirt, not souvenirs from a staff assignment. Take it off. It's out of uniform." A junior lieutenant shifted uncomfortably. To order an officer to remove an issued award, even one he didn't recognize, was a serious breach of protocol. But no one was going to challenge Colonel Thorne. Sharma didn't move. Her voice was still quiet, but it now held a sliver of something hard, like ice forming on still water. "With all due respect, Colonel, Army Regulation 671 states that I am authorized to wear it. I will not be removing it." The air in the talk grew thick. Thorne's face darkened, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He had expected her to crumble, to apologize, to obey. He had not expected calm, reasoned refusal based on the very regulations he was supposed to uphold. He stared at her for a long, charged moment, then gave a short, sharp laugh devoid of humor. "Fine, wear your little pin," he snarled. "I'm sure it will be a great comfort to you while you're inventorying container B7 out by the burn pits. It's been sitting there for 3 months. Sergeant Major tells me the manifests are a complete disaster. Something to keep you busy." He turned his back on her, a clear and final dismissal. Get to it. The assignment was punitive, a clear message. Container B7 was a dead end, a known mess of corrupted paperwork and mismatched cargo that no one wanted to touch. It was a dirty, thankless job meant to isolate her and underscore her irrelevance. As Sharma walked out of the talk, she heard Reyes mutter to a fellow NCO, "Told you, just another clerk with an attitude." She didn't look back. The dismissal was a tool, and she understood its purpose. Let them think she was counting beans. The truth was always found in the details, and no detail was more overlooked than a forgotten shipping manifest in a hot steel box at the edge of the world. For the next 4 days, Sharma worked in the suffocating heat of container B7. The sun beat down on the corrugated steel, turning the inside into a furnace. Sweat soaked through her uniform within minutes, plastering it to her skin. The air was thick with the smell of dust and aging cardboard. To the soldiers who passed by, she was a figure of pity or amusement, the REMF officer banished to the dirtiest job on the FOB. They saw her hauling crates, her face streaked with grime, her brow furrowed in concentration over a data pad. They saw a pen pusher playing soldier. They didn't see what she was truly doing. She wasn't just counting boxes. She was deconstructing a puzzle. The manifests were a disaster, as promised, but not through incompetence. The errors were deliberate, subtle, and systematic. Crates of advanced optics were logged as night vision goggles from a decade ago. Shipments of encrypted radio batteries were listed as standard AAs. Critical medical supplies, plasma, clotting agents, surgical kits were marked as general-purpose first aid kits. It was a ghost inventory, a parallel ledger designed to hide the systematic theft of high-value equipment. Someone was stripping the FOB of its most vital gear, replacing it with older, less effective items, and cooking the books to hide the discrepancy. She worked methodically, cross-referencing shipping numbers with depot logs from Bagram and Kandahar, pulling data from sources the FOB's supply sergeant didn't even know existed. Late at night, in the privacy of her container, she used a small, heavily encrypted satellite transceiver disguised as a personal hard drive to access logistics databases far beyond the reach of the military's standard network. Her fingers moved over the keyboard with the quiet certainty of a master craftsman. Patterns emerged. The theft was sophisticated, targeting items that wouldn't be noticed as missing until they were desperately needed. The specific circuit board for the primary comms antenna, the backup generator coolant, the guidance chips for the Javelin missiles. On the 5th day, she found the connection. The pilfered equipment all correlated with the operational needs for a complex, multi-stage ambush. They were stealing the tools to defeat the very countermeasures the FOB would employ. They were stealing the cure before creating the disease. Her analysis pointed to one terrifying conclusion. An attack was imminent. And it wouldn't be a simple IED or a potshot from the ridges. It would be a coordinated assault designed to cripple the FOB's ability to see, to communicate, and to respond. She correlated the missing gear with the latest local intelligence reports. Chatter about a high-value target moving through the area, a local warlord consolidating power. The picture became chillingly clear. She put it all together in a concise 3-page report. Data, analysis, and a stark conclusion. The upcoming convoy, codenamed Steel Serpent 7, scheduled to depart the next morning with medical resupplies and a new comm suite for a remote outpost, was being sent into a perfectly prepared trap. Her data suggested the planned route, Highway 1, was a kill box. She highlighted an alternate route, a longer, more difficult path through the foothills that the enemy would be unlikely to have covered. She walked back to the talk, the datapad held firmly in her hand. The atmosphere inside was relaxed, almost jovial. They had received intelligence confirming the route was clear. Colonel Thorne was briefing his command staff, a confident smile on his face. "Sharma, what do you want?" he asked, his voice sharp with irritation at the interruption. She stepped forward, holding out the datapad. "Colonel, I have an urgent report regarding tomorrow's convoy. I strongly advise you reroute Steel Serpent 7. The primary route is compromised." Thorne stared at her as if she had lost her mind. He didn't take the datapad. "Compromised? Based on what? Your bean counting?" "Based on a systemic pattern of equipment theft that mirrors the exact tactical requirements for a complex ambush along that route," she said calmly. "The enemy has been equipping themselves with our own gear to counter our response. They have our optics, our comms, batteries, and I suspect our encryption schedules. They will know every move you make." A ripple of disbelief went through the room. A supply clerk was lecturing a battle-hardened infantry colonel on enemy tactics. Thorne's face went rigid with fury. "You are a logistician," he seethed, his voice dangerously low. "You are not an intelligence analyst. You are not a strategist. You have no authority and no perspective to make such an assessment. We have a J2 section for this. They, along with our aerial surveillance, have cleared that route. It is the fastest and safest way through." "Your J2 is working with incomplete data, sir," Sharma pressed, refusing to back down. "The intelligence picture is being deliberately manipulated. They are letting you see a clear route because that's where they want you to go." "And you know this how?" Thorne sneered. "From your magic manifests? From some secret channel you have?" "Yes," she said simply. The sheer audacity of her claim hung in the air. Colonel Thorne's face flushed a deep, mottled red. He snatched the datapad from her hand, glanced at the first page, and then, with a look of utter contempt, he deleted the file. He tossed the datapad onto the table with a clatter. "Get out of my talk, warrant officer," he commanded, his voice shaking with rage. "You are relieved of your audit duties. Consider yourself confined to your quarters until I can arrange a flight to send you back to whatever godforsaken desk you crawled out from under. Your fantasy writing career is over." He turned to his men. "The convoy rolls at 600 as planned. Sergeant Reyes, you have the lead." Reyes, standing by the door, shot Sharma a triumphant smirk. He tapped the butt of his rifle. "Don't you worry, ma'am. We'll be fine. We're professionals." Sharma stood her ground for a second longer, her gaze locking with Thorne's. Her eyes held no anger, no fear. They held a profound, chilling certainty. Then she turned and walked out, the silence she left behind more damning than any shout. The crisis was no longer a matter of probability. It was a matter of time. The clock was ticking. The first transmission came through at 09:17. It was a burst of static, a scream, and then Sergeant Reyes's voice, tight with panic. "Contact! Contact! Ambush at checkpoint Zulu! Heavy RPG and machine gun fire! We're pinned down, taking casualties." The voice was cut off by an explosion, then a high-pitched squeal of feedback. The line went dead. The talk, which had been humming with routine morning activity, erupted into controlled chaos. Colonel Thorne's face was a grim, ashen mask. He had walked his men into the very trap he'd been warned about. "Get the QRF spinning," he roared. "I want birds in the air 5 minutes ago. Get me a location." But there was no location. The primary comms network, the one that linked the FOB to its patrols and its air support, was gone. The screens flickered and died, replaced by cascading lines of digital noise. A secondary system came online, but it too was filled with a deafening, sophisticated jamming signal. They were blind, they were deaf. The FOB had been surgically severed from the outside world. Specialists hunched over terminals, their fingers flying across keyboards, trying to break the electronic siege. "It's a multi-spectrum jammer, sir," a young communications sergeant yelled over the din. "Military grade, they're blanketing everything. I can't get a signal out and nothing is coming in." Panic began to curdle the air. The quick reaction force was armed and ready, their vehicles rumbling outside, but without coordinates, without communications, they were useless. Sending them out blind would be suicide. Thorne slammed his fist on the central table, his command unraveling around him. He had ignored the warning. He had mocked the messenger, and now his men were dying for his arrogance. It was in that moment of paralysis, as the command staff stared helplessly at their dead screens, that Anya Sharma walked back into the talk. She hadn't been confined to her quarters. She had been waiting. Her expression was one of intense, focused calm. She ignored the stares, the chaos, and the colonel himself. She moved with a silent, fluid purpose that was utterly at odds with the frantic energy in the room. She walked directly to the main communications suite, a complex wall of servers and terminals manned by the frantic comms sergeant. "Get out of the way," she said, her voice not loud, but carrying an authority that made the sergeant instinctively take a step back. "Ma'am, that's restricted access," he began, but his protest died in his throat. Sharma didn't bother with the keyboard. From a small pouch on her belt, she produced a compact toolkit. With a single, precise twist of a specialized driver, she popped open a service panel below the main console, one the sergeant had never even been trained to open. Inside was a dense nest of fiber optic cables and circuit boards. Her fingers, nimble and sure, dove into the machine's guts. She wasn't troubleshooting. She was performing surgery. She pulled a small, custom-built micro-router from her pouch and began splicing it directly into the system's core wiring. "What the hell is she doing?" Thorne demanded, his voice a mixture of anger and disbelief. "She's hard-patching a bypass, sir," the comm sergeant whispered, his eyes wide with awe. "She's trying to create a new signal path, routing it through the FOB's internal power grid, using the electrical conduits as a low-frequency antenna. I've only read about this. It's theoretical. But for Sharma, it wasn't theory. It was muscle memory." Within 90 seconds, a single screen flickered to life. It was a raw data feed, heavily corrupted, but it was a signal, a tiny pinprick of light in the electronic darkness. It was too weak to transmit voice or data over distance, but it was a start. "I need to boost the signal," Sharma said, more to herself than to anyone else. "I need line of sight." She turned and strode towards the armory hatch at the back of the TOS. She keyed in a code, and the heavy door hissed open. Thorne's command sergeant major started to object, but a look from Sharma silenced him. She moved past the racks of standard-issue M4 carbines and selected an M110A1, a squad-designated marksman rifle. It was a long, heavy, precision weapon. She didn't handle it like a logistician. She handled it like an extension of her own body. She slapped a magazine into the well, racked the charging handle, and checked the chamber with an economy of motion that was brutally efficient. She slung the rifle over her back, grabbed a portable signal booster and a spool of fiber optic cable, and headed for the TOC exit. Specialist Davies, a young soldier who had been watching the entire scene unfold with a mixture of terror and fascination, made a split-second decision. He grabbed his own rifle and followed her out into the blinding, dusty chaos of the FOB. Thorne watched her on the security monitors, his face a canvas of confusion. "Where is she going? Someone stop her." But it was too late. Sharma was already sprinting across the open ground of the motor pool, heading for the tallest structure on the FOB, Watchtower 4, a rickety steel skeleton on the northeastern perimeter. Just as she reached the base of the ladder, the world shook. A deafening crump echoed across the base, followed by the whistle of incoming fire. A geyser of dirt and rock erupted 50 meters from the mess hall. "Mortars!" someone screamed over the internal comms. "Incoming!" The second phase of the attack had begun. The enemy wasn't just isolating them, they were walking artillery right onto the FOB. The ambush on the convoy was a feint, a lure to draw their attention outward while the real threat closed in. Sharma didn't hesitate. She began to climb the tower's ladder, the heavy rifle banging against her back. Davies, his face pale, scrambled up after her. The air was filled with the shriek of incoming rounds and the percussive blasts of their impacts. The steel structure of the tower vibrated with each explosion. When they reached the top platform, the view was terrifying. Plumes of black smoke rose from across the FOB. The enemy was bracketing their positions, methodically walking the mortars toward the command center and the aid station. Sharma ignored the chaos below. She unslung the rifle and set up the signal booster, connecting it to her datapad with the fiber optic cable. The wind whipped at her, trying to tear the equipment from her hands. She dropped to one knee, raising the rifle and peering through the high-powered scope. the world resolved into a circle of sharp, magnified detail. Her breathing slowed. Her heartbeat, which should have been hammering against her ribs, became a slow, steady rhythm. The chaos of the battle faded into a distant hum. There was only the scope, the wind, and the target. She scanned the eastern ridge, the most likely position for a mortar team. Her eyes moved with disciplined patience, dismissing shadows, rocks, and heat haze. Then she saw it. A flicker of movement, a glint of light off a lens. Two figures, prone, nestled in a small outcropping of rock. One was speaking into a radio. The other was looking through a pair of binoculars, directing the fire. The spotter team. She got on the FOB's local comms, her voice cutting through the panic with impossible calm. "Talk, this is Sharma in Watchtower 4. I have positive identification on the enemy mortar spotter team. Grid 345-891, Eastern Ridge, 1400 meters. 2 individuals. Request permission to engage." There was a stunned silence from the talk. A logistician was calling in targets from a watchtower that was actively being shelled. Thorne, standing frozen before the comms panel, couldn't form a response. Another mortar round landed, this one closer. It struck the ground near the base of the tower, and the entire structure groaned, swaying violently. Shrapnel pinged off the steel supports. Davies cried out, flattened against the floor, convinced they were about to die. Sharma didn't flinch. She adjusted her scope for windage and elevation, the numbers clicking through her mind with the cold precision of a calculator. She didn't have time to wait for permission from a paralyzed commander. "Engaging," she said flatly into the radio. She settled the crosshairs on the man with the radio. She controlled her breathing, exhaling slowly, smoothly. In the silent space between heartbeats, she squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, a deafening crack that was swallowed by the larger sounds of the battle. For a fraction of a second, nothing seemed to happen. Then, 400 meters away, the first figure jerked and collapsed. The second man, the spotter, looked up in confusion, realizing what had happened. He scrambled for his own weapon. Sharma was already on him. She worked the bolt, ejected the spent casing, chambered a new round, reacquired her target, and fired again. The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds. The second figure fell. A long, tense silence followed. Then, the relentless, terrifying whistle of incoming mortars stopped. Just like that, the immediate threat to the FOB had been neutralized. But she wasn't finished. With the spotters eliminated, she turned her attention back to the comms. Her jury-rigged link was weak, but it was now clear enough to pick up faint signals from outside the jamming field. She triangulated the source of the overwhelming jamming itself. It wasn't a fixed installation. It was a mobile unit. A truck, probably, positioned to cover the ambush site on Highway 1. She switched frequencies, searching for the QRF's channel. She found it, a faint whisper beneath the static. "Spartan 6, this is Watchtower 4. Do you copy?" A garbled voice came back. "Barely read you. Who is this?" "Listen carefully, Spartan 6, Sharma said, her voice hard and clear. "Your primary route is a kill box. The enemy is waiting for you. I have a new target for you, the jamming vehicle. It is located at grid 348-902. I am sending you a new route now that will bypass the main enemy force and bring you in on their flank. They will not be expecting you. Acknowledge." On her datapad, she drew a new route and pushed the data packet through the fragile connection. A moment later, the QRF leader's voice came back, stronger now that he was focused on her signal. "Solid copy, Watchtower, on our way." For the next 20 minutes, Sharma became the battlefield. From her perch in the swaying, damaged tower, she was the eyes, ears, and brain of the entire operation. She guided the QRF along the treacherous mountain tracks, using the DMR's powerful optics to call out potential threats. She relayed her observations to the TOC, painting a clear picture of the enemy's disposition. Her voice was a calm, steady metronome in the symphony of chaos, directing, correcting, and controlling the battle with an authority that left no room for doubt. She wasn't a logistician, she was a conductor, and this was her orchestra. The counterattack was swift and brutal. The QRF, guided by Sharma's precise instructions, slammed into the enemy's flank. They caught the jamming crew and their security detail completely by surprise. A fierce, one-sided firefight erupted, and within minutes the mobile jammer was a burning wreck. As if a switch had been thrown, the electronic world snapped back into existence. The screens in the TOC flared to life. The radio channels cleared, flooded with the voices of the QRF reporting success and of Sergeant Reyes's beleaguered convoy, who were now able to fight back as the pressure on them eased. With the enemy command and control shattered, the ambushers broke and fled. The battle was over. Back in the TOC, a stunned silence had fallen. The entire command staff had listened to the comms, had watched the single friendly icon on their screens, labeled Sharma, orchestrate the salvation of their men. They had witnessed a master at work. Colonel Thorne stood motionless, his face pale, staring at the screen as if trying to comprehend what he had just seen. The command sergeant major, a grizzled veteran named Kenji Tanaka, who had seen more war than anyone in the room, walked quietly to Thorne's side. He had been pulling up Sharma's file from the moment she started climbing the tower. "Colonel," Tanaka said, his voice a low rumble, "you need to see this." He gestured to a secondary monitor. Thorne tore his eyes away from the main map and looked. It was Sharma's official personnel file, or rather, what was left of it. Most of the document was a vast sea of black redactions. Her service history, her training records, her previous assignments, all classified above top secret, far beyond a field-grade colonel's clearance. But a few lines were visible. Her official specialty was listed not as a simple logistician, but as Special Operations Logistics and Asset Management. And beneath that, a single cryptic line item under previous unit assignments, Special Activities Division, Detachment K. Thorne had never heard of it. He looked at Tanaka, a question in his eyes. The sergeant major just pointed at the screen. His aide, a young captain, was already working, trying to find any reference to the unit. He found an associated insignia. He clicked on it. A high-resolution image filled the screen. It was the tarnished silver pin from Sharma's uniform, the stylized eagle diving from the sky. Below, it was the official nomenclature, the Regulus pin. And under that, a short, chilling description. Awarded for exemplary performance during direct action operations conducted under presidential finding. The seal of the President of the United States is micro-engraved on the reverse side of the award. A wave of cold realization washed over Thorne. Detachment K. He had heard whispers of it, ghost stories told by old intelligence officers and Green Berets. A unit that didn't officially exist. They weren't soldiers in the traditional sense. They were surgical problem solvers, deployed quietly and alone to places that were about to fall apart. They were logisticians who could run battlefields, analysts who could shoot the wings off a fly at a mile, and quiet professionals who answered to no one but the highest, most shadowed echelons of national command. She hadn't been sent here to count his beans. She had been sent here to fix his failing command. The audit was a cover, a way for her to get inside, to observe, to find the rot without anyone knowing who she really was. The stolen equipment, the compromised patrols, the coming disaster. She was the failsafe he never knew he needed. And he had mocked her. He had tried to banish her. He had called her pin a cereal box toy. The door to the talk opened. Sharma walked in, covered in dust and cordite residue. The M110A1 was slung over her shoulder. She moved with a weary grace, her face an unreadable mask of calm. The entire room, from the lowest specialist to the colonel himself, went dead silent. Every single person turned to look at her. She seemed not to notice. Her gaze swept over the now functioning screens, confirming the situation was stable. She walked past the central command table, past Colonel Thorne, and headed straight for the battered coffee machine in the corner as if nothing had happened. She was just a logistician after all, and it had been a long morning. As she was pouring the thick black liquid into a stained ceramic mug, Colonel Thorne approached. He moved slowly, hesitantly, like a man approaching an unexploded bomb. His arrogance was gone, stripped away by the harsh light of his own failure and her terrifying competence. He stopped a few feet from her. The entire talk held its breath. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. What could he say? I'm sorry for almost getting my men killed? I apologize for my hubris? The words were too small, too inadequate. Instead, his eyes fell to the silver pin on her chest. It seemed to catch the dim light of the talk, gleaming with a quiet, profound significance. "Warrant officer," he began, his voice raspy. He stopped. He corrected himself, using the proper term of address for a warrant officer of her standing, a title of respect he had deliberately withheld before. "Ma'am." He stood there for a moment, then did the only thing he could. He brought himself to the position of attention and rendered a slow, formal salute. It wasn't the perfunctory gesture of a superior to a subordinate. It was the salute of a soldier acknowledging a warrior. Sharma paused, her hand holding the coffee mug. She looked at him, her dark eyes meeting his. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply gave a short, almost imperceptible nod. She had not come here for apologies or accolades. She had come here to do a job. The job was done. Later that afternoon, she was in the armory, meticulously cleaning the M110A1. Each component was stripped, wiped down, and oiled with a practiced, reverent care. Sergeant Reyes found her there. His arm was in a sling, his face pale and etched with the memory of the ambush. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by a humbled, haunted stillness. He stood in the doorway for a long time, just watching her. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Ma'am." Sharma looked up from her work. "What you did out there?" Reyes started, then trailed off, unable to find the words to describe the calm lethality he had only heard over the radio. "They told me, 2 shots, over a click, you saved us, all of us." He swallowed hard, his bravado shattered into a million pieces. He looked at this quiet, unassuming woman who he had mocked just days before, and he saw something he couldn't comprehend. He did the only thing that made sense. He snapped his body to the rigid posture of attention and delivered the sharpest, most heartfelt salute of his life. Sharma watched him, her hands still. She held his gaze for a moment, then gave him the same slow, deliberate nod she had given the colonel. It was an acknowledgement, an acceptance, a dismissal. Then she returned to her work, the soft, rhythmic sound of metal sliding against an oiled cloth filling the silence. That night, the storm that had threatened for days finally broke. A cold, clean rain washed, the dust from the air and the blood from the gravel. The FOB was quiet, the tension of the day replaced by a weary calm. Anya Sharma sat alone on a stack of sandbags at the edge of the perimeter, just outside the reach of the floodlights. The rain had stopped, and the air was crisp and cool. She looked out at the dark, hulking shapes of the mountains, their peaks shrouded in clouds. The generators hummed their constant monotonous song. Slowly, she reached up and unfastened the Regulus pin from her uniform. She held it in the palm of her hand, turning it over and over with her thumb. It felt heavy, a small, dense point of weight in her hand. It wasn't a trophy. It wasn't a medal to be polished and displayed. It was a burden, a reminder of the things she had done, the places she had been, and the promises she had to keep. In the faint moonlight, she tilted the pin just so. For a fleeting instant, she could see it, the microscopic, impossibly detailed engraving on the reverse side. The proud eagle, the shield, the olive branch, and the arrows. The seal of the President of the United States, a symbol of a trust so absolute it could never be spoken of. She closed her hand around it, the cool metal pressing into her skin. Then, with a quiet sigh, she pinned it back onto her uniform, making sure it was perfectly straight. She stood up, her duty roster for the next day already forming in her mind. There were still manifests to reconcile, supply chains to secure. The crisis was over, but the work was not. She walked back toward the faint glow of the command post, a solitary figure moving through the darkness, a silent guardian ensuring the survival of the many who would never know her name, or the true meaning of the tarnished silver pin she wore.